moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch, and there's 1 week left from when you're listening to this to go ahead and back Gemini Jump. It's going to close on Friday, November 5th. And this is a comic made by Larry King. He's done indie comics for a while. He's got a pretty cool little style, very unique. And we did a comic, tried to make it as cheap as humanly possible. $10, you get the comic, and that includes the shipping. And we're going to include some free stuff in there. But you can also get the digital copy and all the rest. So hope you enjoy the comic. Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm driving around here in Seattle, and there's a what is it, a cyclone bomb, a storm bomb? It's like this is a thing about the Pacific Northwest, and I love the Pacific Northwest. I do. Every time I say that I live up here, people in the comments want to show up and talk to me about the politics. Look, it's if you don't live in Seattle, if you don't live in that city, it's easy not to get impacted by the politics. And this is one of the big misnomers, and it's true of every place. It's like you could say what you want about San Francisco. If you go 45 minutes, east from San Francisco, you're going to find a very different community. That's life. Just like if you go to downtown Dallas and you go 45 minutes east of that, you're going to get to a very different place. That's how the world works. So when I say Pacific Northwest, keep in mind that's a massive region. And it's the other thing, people don't know this about Washington, but most of the counties vote red in Washington, vote Republican. It's just that the really popular ones are the populated ones vote blue, and so it's a very blue state for that reason. That's where the numbers are. But anyway, but I do love the trees and I like the rain. I like the clouds. I like the mountains. I like the access to the ocean. It's a great place to live. It really, really is. And all the rest is there's always something to bitch about. Anyway, one thing I do hate about it, and then we're going way too long in this video with the stupid intro, is the reaction to weather. One dumb thing I can say about this area is that people do not know how to drive on things like snow, ice. We don't normally get a lot of it. But the more confusing one, rain. There's plenty of rain here, but people just cannot handle weather. So they invent crazy names for it, the most dramatic stuff possible. They build the sewers and the rain drainage with tiny grates, so leaves fall and immediately clogs it all and floods everything. It is a cluster of bad decisions when it comes to this. I remember, I've said this story before, I'm driving down the road. It had snowed, the roads are icy, and I'm listening to the Cairo 1000 news, which is giving me the traffic and the weather. And they go, it's very icy out there, so we need, some tips for when you're driving. If you feel your car start to get a little out of control, if you feel like you start to slide or skid, you want to stomp on those brakes as fast as you can to get the car to a stop before it gets too out of control. So just slam on those brakes. And I remember driving and hearing this and instant panic. I'm like, oh crap, somebody just peed my pants. Just because I'm surrounded by cars and I'm thinking, please, nobody listen to that guidance. Anyway, sorry, too much intro. Half of you are gone already. Here's a viewer question. It has nothing to do with Pacific Northwest or weather or anything else. And it says, hey Perch, I enjoy listening to your YouTube videos. That's nice. See if you still think that after the last 3 minutes of this video. A question maybe you can address in a future video. Do people care about story anymore? I think if people were to look back 40 years and say, what was great about comics then, people would immediately say the Dark Phoenix saga or the Judas Contract or the Great Darkness saga. In other words, actual stories. And I can remember it was the actual stories that made me so eager to pick up the next issue to find out what happens next. But today, people don't seem to care or focus on the story anymore. People talk about John Kent or Tim Drake revealing they're bi, or there's now a transgender Amazon, but those aren't stories. Those are things that the characters are. It's not plot or character development. It's sort of, in fairness, it is sort of character development, but it's a very surface level trait of character development. But I catch your point. The writer is not wrong. So when people look back on this period 40 years from now, what will they remember instead of stories? Do the writers at DC and Marvel even think in terms of stories anymore? Do fans care about the stories anymore? Is it that fans don't seem to care about the story because the writers are no longer interested in actually writing stories, so all we have left to talk about is identity? Thanks for reading my rambling. Not rambling at all. Great question and legitimate one. And I think, yes, I think the buyers, the customers, the people who are actually shelling out money for comics, I think they very much care about story. And I think to prove it, you can look at the success of things like the Three Jokers, which short had a story. It was telling a narrative. The Doomsday Clock had a story, and people cared for that. The Walking Dead had a massive success, and it was driven on story. Walking Dead wasn't colored. Walking Dead didn't have a bunch of variants and other silliness going on with it, and yet it was able to command attention. Why? It made you care about the characters because it had a compelling story. Maybe zombie stories aren't your thing, but it was story that drove that. I think comics like Saga did very much about the story. Saga's a good one because people will say, and they have in several of my videos lately, woke comics don't sell. Well, Saga is pretty, what people define as woke. Saga is that. It definitely has gender politics. It definitely has gay characters. It definitely has different races. Different aliens for that matter. But it has a lot of the tropes. It has a strong female character. If you go down the list of what people complain about in comics around identity politics and all this kind of stuff, Saga checks almost every box. The difference, though, is that Saga did put a story behind it. Now, I will say for the record, I like Saga. I think it's a good book. Always sold really well. Sells well for a lot of retailers in lots of different parts of the country, not just the Pacific Northwest. But I do think the story has gone off the rails before it went on hiatus. It did seem like it was spinning, and had again nothing to do. It wasn't the quote unquote woke part. It just the story got convoluted to me personally. I just story got wonky there. Wasn't really clear what they were trying to accomplish right about the time the girl was sent to a kind of a prison-ish thing. Anyway, I think if you have a story, people care. And I think that if you have a story and it's combined with a particular genre, be it horror or romance or identity politics, whatever it happens to be, I think you can pull it off with people who are interested in those kinds of things. If you have a choice between a comic with nothing but kind of surface identity stunts or stories, people are going to migrate to the stories. That's what they're naturally going to do. And so that's reasonable. That's normal. That's what people ultimately are after. Now, I think what's happened in comics and what's happened in the publishers is they look at comics on a much shorter leash or a much shorter timetable. Very few publishers right now are willing to commit to long-term plans. Case in point, James Tynion comes on to Batman after Tom King. Tom King has a long run. For comics, an epically long run of 70 plus issues. And they basically are going to put in to this mix James Tynion is going to come in and be the writer. Now they gave him next to no run. He had a couple issues. It just turned out that what he produced got people's attention, sold well. They didn't have another trick up their sleeve. I don't know what their plans were going to be outside of Tynion. Maybe that fell through. It basically hit the perfect storm of captured some reader attention, seemed to have a clear narrative, seemed to be the antidote to what the people who were detractors of Tom King's run wanted, and they didn't have a good option at the time that they were going with. Therefore, Tynion wound up getting a longer run. But even in Tynion's going to wind up with a run that's, under 2 years, right? How long is Tynion be on that book? It's going to be, I think, under 2 years of run, maybe 3. Maybe it gets to 3. But anyway, a short run, all things considered. But the publisher themselves were not looking at a long run. They weren't focusing on story. They were thinking just a couple issues at a time. You look at, what Jeff Thorne has said when he's done interviews with her, where he's hoping that he gets a second arc. I'm presuming, and maybe I'm wrong here, but the second arc he's talking about is another 6 issues. So if I'm using that logic, it means that they're making these plans 6 issues at a time. Well, here's the thing. I don't know that you can do a great story in 6 issues. It's possible. I mentioned Three Jokers earlier. That was 3. They're bigger and sort of a different thing, but still, you can pull off a story. But it's hard to pull off an ongoing story in an ongoing comic when you're only looking ahead 6 issues at a time. It's almost impossible. So if you're a writer or you're an editor, and that's the time frame in which you're thinking, then where do you go? Well, you start thinking about stunts. And I think that is the right term. A lot of people are throwing out the identity politics or, surface level traits, that kind of stuff, and which is not wrong, but how it's being used in this approach is more of a stunt. I think you look at the Nubia and the Amazon situation. There was a trans character, basically, I don't want to say stealth introduced in that title. I don't think that the writer misled the editor that they were doing that, but they didn't. It wasn't pick. You wouldn't pick up on it in the book, so they have to go to Twitter to announce that they've put it into the book in order to achieve the attention for it, in order to achieve the stunt. I don't mean stunt completely derogatory, although in this case it sort of is, because I would prefer stories over stunts. You look at the John Kent coming out. So as it's been now revealed, as he said himself in interviews, Tom Taylor had a pitch for, Superman, son of Kal-El, John Kent, Superboy. And Tom Taylor, basically one of his big reveals was to give John Kent a boyfriend, reveal him as bisexual. Wait a minute, isn't John Kent cheating on Saturn Girl? Like, he's actually cheating on Saturn Girl right now, right? I mean, we know that relationship's in the future, but it's John Kent's current lifetime. Isn't he dating her in the future? I think did they break up? I think John Kent's cheating on, man, that's going to be an awkward moment. Saturn Girl, God, I don't want to see that moment in comics. Okay, sorry, I'm getting derailed again. But regardless, the the situation there is that Tom Taylor basically had a pitch that involved, hey, we're going to have this coming out moment. We're going to do a bunch of PR. It becomes the stunt. Now, I'm willing to bet that Tom Taylor, even though he's on this book, even though he gave the CNN interviews, all the rest, I'm still willing to bet that DC did not give him a commitment beyond 12 issues. I'd be shocked if they did, and maybe they did. If they did, that would make me happy. But in that kind of world, you're going to lean more on stunts. So to your question, do people care? Absolutely, the customers do, and this is one of the big disconnects and problems right now within comics. The customers care a lot. The customers absolutely want stories. The customers absolutely want a reason to come back the next month, and they do want to remember these things 40 years from now. And this is really bad. There's no other way to put it. This is a big negative right now that basically customers are, the customers want something. The publishers, because they do not want to plan out in a long, time frame, are basically delivering stunts. And that's where we're at right now. This is harmful to comics. This is going to have bad long-term consequences. And you identified where 40, if we look back 40 years ago, or even 30 years ago, we can name several big stories, several things that we'd love to see adapted to movies, several things that built franchises. The Dark Phoenix saga, I mean, sure, it's been a movie. It was a terrible movie, but it's been that. But it's also been something that's had tons of repeat sales and trades. It's built a foundation for this transformation of the X-Men and cosmic things and all kind. I mean, look at all the stuff that actually came about because of the Dark Phoenix saga. A lot of comics came about because of that. A lot of stories, a lot of myths, a lot of things they're doing right now. The whole Phoenix tournament that Jason Aaron borrowed from, the Echo series, the kind of the entire nature of Cyclops as a leader and how all that meant, a lot of the cosmic stuff. I mean, Marvel is still drawing on the interest of that story today. The part that should terrify people is, what are we going to look at 30 years from now? Are we going to look at the moment John Kent came out? I mean, the funny part is, and kind of work with me here with my logic, it will actually mean for the people who are trying to, really go for equality and push LGBTQ rights and other things, if people are still surprised and find it heroic and brave in 2050 that John Kent came out in a comic book, that will actually likely mean that things have not progressed that well for equality. If that's still chances are in 2050 nobody's going to care about any of this because we'll have settled a lot of these issues. It's like how stories about AIDS do not have the punch today in 2021 that they did in 1989. That's just you're hoping that things progress to a point where you don't this stuff isn't a novelty. The people who are pushing for LGBTQ rights should also hope for that. They don't want to be a novelty in 2050. They want acceptance. If they get that, these stories that have these kinds of elements they're going to seem antique and weird. And if all you have going for you in the story were these big stunts, what's left? People are going to want to remember the huge epic confrontation. I mean, look, right now, Philip Kennedy Johnson doing his War World epic with Superman. He's hoping. I mean, he should. I don't know if he is, but I'm assuming he is. He should be hoping that this story is going to be remembered in people's minds. That it's going to be huge. That they're going to remember that time Superman went off into a desolate, remote part of space and had this epic adventure, kind of like World War Hulk. That's what you're hoping. That's the stuff people remember. So to your question, yeah, I mean, this is stuff people want. It's not what the publishers are currently doing. I think they're doing it for these reasons. These reasons are just short-term thinking and not wanting to commit to things long-term and all the rest. And I think that's going to come back and bite them in the ass in a very terrible way. I'll throw one more thing, as long as I'm doing the trifecta of all the things people like to talk about on the internet. One of the reasons I am convinced that manga is doing very well right now is that manga is absolutely story-driven in almost all cases. There's very little stunts. In some cases, agonizingly so. If you are reading through One Piece, you know the horrors of when One Piece decides to do a flashback. It's like, oh, we're going to get some backstory here. Well, I'll catch up on this big epic fight that we were in the middle of in 40 chapters. See you then. I love One Piece, but the flashbacks do get absurd. I mean, you have to. Anyone honest has to admit that. But this is manga is doing very well. People like to point to, hey, it doesn't have the Western ideology and the politics and all that kind of stuff. But if you actually dig into it, you find that a lot of manga does. Big genres have all those elements. However, like Saga, like these other things, they have story. They focus very heavily on story. They do very little. You would not see a manga chapter come out and say, yeah, in this issue, guess which member of the My Hero Academia team is gay? It would be the French dude who's got the navel laser, by the way. It would be him. Anyway, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that chapter. They would never even think to bill it and market and promote it that way. The curious part is why does the U.S. side think that that's a good idea? I think there's tons of evidence it is definitely not. Anyway, my perspective. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, as always, and thanks for listening.